You people always think the rules don't apply to you, Officer Justin Bell sneered, his hand resting casually on his heavy-duty holster. Step out of the vehicle now. Shanice Wright didn't raise her voice. She didn't panic. She simply looked at the young, smirking officer through her silver wire glasses with a quiet, piercing intensity that absolutely should have warned him. Officer, I highly recommend you double-check those plates before you do something you will profoundly regret. He just laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound that echoed in the heavy summer air. He had no idea he had just pulled over the wrong woman. The suffocating July heat hung heavy over the sprawling, affluent suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia. The asphalt shimmered with a visible mirage, distorting the sleek, polished lines of the silver Lexus RX 350 as it idled obediently at a red light on Peachtree Road. Inside, the climate control hummed a steady, quiet rhythm, creating a cool oasis where Shanice Wright sat relaxed behind the leather-wrapped steering wheel. She was a woman who commanded respect in every room she entered, without ever having to demand it. At 45, her sharp, intelligent eyes missed nothing, framed by elegant glasses that caught the afternoon light. Her natural hair was styled in immaculate professional locks. She wore a simple, expertly tailored navy blazer over a crisp white silk blouse, the uniform of a woman accustomed to commanding boardrooms and navigating high-stakes environments, not enduring roadside traffic stops. In her rearview mirror, the flashing red and blue lights erupted like a violent, jarring interruption to her peaceful afternoon commute. Shanice let out a soft, measured sigh, tapping the steering wheel once with her manicured fingernail before activating her turn signal. With practiced grace, she smoothly pulled the luxury SUV into the expansive parking lot of a nearby CVS pharmacy, ensuring she was completely out of the flow of traffic. She placed the car in park, rolled down her tinted window to let in a blast of sweltering air, and deliberately placed her hands at the 10 and 2 positions on the steering wheel, fingers spread wide and clearly visible. It was a practiced, tragic motion, a survival instinct ingrained in her despite her immense personal and professional accomplishments. Officer Justin Bell approached the vehicle with a slow, exaggerated swagger that suggested he believed he owned the pavement he walked on. He was young, perhaps late 20s, with close-cropped blonde hair and a dark blue uniform that looked a little too tight across his chest, as if he bought it a size small to emphasize his physique. His eyes, shielded by cheap mirrored aviator sunglasses, were unreadable, but his body language screamed unearned arrogance. He stopped just behind the driver's side door, tactically positioning himself in her blind spot, his hand resting conspicuously near the grip of his service weapon. "License and registration," he demanded, his tone flat, unyielding, and completely devoid of standard professional courtesy. "Good afternoon, officer," Shanice replied, her voice remaining calm, modulated, and profoundly polite. "My license is in my purse on the passenger seat, and the registration is in the glove compartment. May I reach for them?" Bell didn't answer immediately. He leaned in slightly, invading her personal space as his gaze swept aggressively over the pristine interior of the luxury SUV. He took in the cream leather, the polished wood trim, and then let his gaze linger on Shanice with blatant suspicion. "Just get them," he snapped, his jaw tight. "And no sudden movements. I'm watching you." Moving with deliberate, unhurried slowness, Shanice retrieved the requested documents and handed them through the open window. Bell snatched them from her fingers. He scrutinized the Georgia driver's license, his lips curling into a faint, mocking smile as he looked from the plastic card to the woman sitting before him. "Shanice Wright," he read slowly, drawing out the syllables as if the very name offended his sensibilities. "This your car, Shanice?" "Yes, officer, it is." "Funny," Bell drawled, tapping the edge of the hard plastic license rhythmically against his palm. "Doesn't look like the kind of car someone like you would be driving around this neighborhood. You lost? Take a wrong turn off the highway?" The microaggression hung in the humid air between them, thick, toxic, and entirely undeniable. Shanice maintained her flawless composure. She had, unfortunately, faced men exactly like Justin Bell before, men whose fragile authority was built entirely on a foundation of deep-seated prejudice and personal insecurity. "I live 3 blocks from here, officer," she stated evenly, refusing to break eye contact with his mirrored lenses. "In the Buckhead district," Bell snorted, a short, ugly sound of disbelief. "Right. And I'm the King of England. Step out of the car." "On what grounds, officer?" Shanice asked, her voice remaining steady but acquiring a new, firm edge of steel. "I was stopped at a red light. I haven't committed a traffic violation, nor was I speeding. I said step out of the car," Bell repeated, his voice rising in volume, a dangerous, unpredictable edge creeping into his tone. "Or I will physically assist you out. You people always think the rules don't apply to you." Shanice didn't raise her voice. She didn't panic. She simply looked at the young, smirking officer with a quiet intensity that should have warned him he was wading into deep waters. "Officer, I highly recommend you double-check those plates before you do something you will profoundly regret." Bell's face hardened, flushing red with sudden anger at being challenged. He deliberately unclipped the heavy retention strap on his holster with an audible snap. "Are you threatening a police officer? Step out, now." Knowing the extreme physical danger of escalation in these precise moments, Shanice slowly unbuckled her seatbelt. "I am stepping out of the vehicle," she announced calmly, narrating her actions. She opened the heavy door and stepped out into the oppressive, suffocating heat of the asphalt. Standing tall, her posture perfect, absolutely refusing to be diminished by the shiny piece of metal pinned to his chest. The CVS parking lot was quickly transforming from a quiet commercial space into a makeshift theater, beginning to draw a small, watchful crowd. A few afternoon shoppers paused near the automatic sliding glass entrance, their eyes darting nervously between the gleaming silver Lexus and the tense, quiet standoff unfolding beside it. Cell phones were discreetly pulled from pockets. Officer Bell seemed acutely, almost hungrily aware of his audience. His chest puffed out slightly, performing for the onlookers as he directed Shanice to the back of her SUV with sharp, barked commands. "Turn around, hands flat on the vehicle, spread your feet," he ordered. Shanice complied, placing her palms gently against the warm metal of the trunk. She felt a profound sense of exhaustion wash over her, not physical fatigue, but a deep, familiar ache in her soul. She was profoundly tired of the inherent suspicion, tired of having to constantly present credentials to prove she belonged in the very neighborhood she helped build. "Do you have any weapons on you? Anything that's going to poke, stick, or stab me?" Bell asked, his hands moving aggressively to frisk her. "No, officer." His pat-down was rougher than necessary, an intrusive, deeply demeaning display of physical dominance meant to humiliate her in front of the gathering crowd. He found nothing but the smooth fabric of her blazer, of course. He stepped back, a fleeting look of frustrated disappointment crossing his sharp features. "Why exactly did you pull me over, Officer Bell?" Shanice asked again, having deliberately noted his last name etched on his silver uniform tag. "Your driver's side tail light is out," Bell replied smoothly. Far too smoothly. It sounded rehearsed. Shanice frowned slightly, her mind working rapidly. She had her car fully serviced at the premier Hennessy Lexus dealership just 2 days ago. They had run a comprehensive bumper-to-bumper diagnostic. "My taillight was fine when I left my driveway 10 minutes ago," she said, her voice ringing with certainty. "Well, it's out now," Bell countered, crossing his arms. "And considering your uncooperative attitude and refusal to obey a lawful order smoothly, I'm going to need to search your vehicle to ensure public safety. Do I have your consent?" "No, officer, you absolutely do not," Shanice said clearly, projecting her voice just enough so the nearest bystanders could hear her assertion of her rights. "I do not consent to a search of my vehicle. There is zero probable cause." Bell's arrogant smirk returned, wider this time. "Probable cause is subjective out here, ma'am. I smell what I strongly believe to be raw marijuana emanating from the cabin of the vehicle. That gives me the legal right to search." It was a blatant, desperate lie. Shanice had never smoked a day in her life. Her car's interior smelled exclusively of expensive conditioned leather and a subtle high-end lavender air freshener. She realized with absolute clarity then that this wasn't about a broken taillight, nor was it a routine traffic stop. This was a dedicated power trip, a terrifying manifestation of unchecked bias wrapped in the authority of the state. "That is a complete fabrication, officer," Shanice said, her tone icy and uncompromising. "And I strongly suggest you call your watch commander or field supervisor to this scene immediately." "I don't need to bother my supervisor to handle a routine traffic stop with an unruly driver," Bell scoffed, his ego blinding his judgment. He grabbed the microphone clipped to his shoulder. "Dispatch, Unit 412. I need a K9 unit at my location. Suspicion of narcotics in a vehicle." He looked back at Shanice, his eyes gleaming behind the aviators with malicious, triumphant satisfaction. "We're going to do this the hard way, then. Have a seat on the curb and don't move." For the next 45 minutes, Shanice sat on the sweltering, unforgiving concrete. The heat radiated through her slacks. She watched silently as Bell paced back and forth like a caged animal, occasionally leaning against his cruiser to chat with a second officer who had arrived as backup. The backup officer, an older, heavier man named Davis, looked distinctly uncomfortable with the situation. He kept casting nervous glances at Shanice's professional attire and the pristine car, but he remained silently complicit, saying nothing to intervene in his younger partner's charade. Finally, a heavy-duty police Tahoe rolled into the lot, and the requested K9 unit arrived. A muscular, highly trained German Shepherd was led out and guided around the Lexus. The dog sniffed diligently at the seams of the doors, the trunk, and the wheel wells, pausing occasionally to investigate a speck of dirt, but giving absolutely no trained alert. The handler, looking exasperated in the heat, pulled back the leash and shook his head firmly at Bell. "Nothing, man. Dog's not hitting on a damn thing, it's clean." Bell's jaw tightened so hard the muscles jumped. He looked visibly embarrassed in front of his colleague and the murmuring crowd, and embarrassment often fueled volatile anger in men like him. "Fine," Bell snapped, waving the handler off. He marched back over to where Shanice sat, a leather citation book gripped tightly in his hand. He aggressively ripped a ticket off the pad and practically shoved it toward her chest. "Citation for a broken taillight," he barked, trying to salvage the last scraps of his dominance, "and a written warning for failure to comply with a lawful order." Shanice didn't look down at the yellow ticket fluttering in her hand. She stood up, brushing off her slacks, and looked directly, unblinkingly, into Justin Bell's eyes. "I will see you in court, Officer Bell." "I look forward to it. Bring your checkbook," he sneered, turning his back on her and strutting toward his cruiser. "You have a nice day now." Shanice's legs were stiff from sitting on the hard curb, but her mind was racing with razor-sharp clarity. She walked smoothly to the back of her car and looked down at the tail-light assembly. Both lights were perfectly intact, gleaming in the sun. She calmly pulled out her smartphone, opened the camera application, and snapped several high-resolution, clear photos of the lights. She made sure the time, GPS location, and date stamp were visibly enabled on the images. She then got back into the cool embrace of her car. Officer Bell thought he had won the encounter. He didn't realize the real battle was just beginning. 3 weeks later, the sprawling Fulton County Courthouse bustled with its usual chaotic, nervous energy. Lawyers in sharp, expensive suits hurried past anxious defendants clutching crumpled paperwork. The stale air was thick with the low murmur of rapid-fire legal jargon, the squeak of polished shoes on linoleum, and nervous chatter. Officer Justin Bell strode through the main entrance metal detectors with his familiar, swaggering gait, bypassing the long civilian lines. Traffic court was usually a breeze for him, an easy morning of overtime pay. People showed up, plead guilty to avoid the hassle, paid their exorbitant fines, or mumbled a weak excuse that the judge quickly dismissed. The system ruled in his favor 99% of the time. He paused to check the printed docket posted on the bulletin board outside the heavy wooden doors of Courtroom 4B, City of Atlanta versus Shanice Wright. A smirk touched his lips. He remembered her perfectly. the arrogant, icy woman with the fancy luxury SUV who thought her zip code made her better than him. He was genuinely looking forward to putting her in her place again, this time with the full weight of a judge backing him up. Bell pushed through the swinging doors and took his usual seat in the first 2 rows, a section specifically reserved for law enforcement officers. He adjusted his heavy utility belt, leaned back, and exchanged a quiet joke with a fellow patrolman about the misery of traffic duty. When the bailiff finally called the case 20 minutes later, Bell stood up promptly and walked to the prosecutor's table, a confident, easy smile plastered on his face. He expected to see Shanice Wright standing alone at the podium, perhaps looking intimidated by the imposing wood-paneled courtroom, the high ceilings, and the inherent majesty of the legal system. Instead, she was seated calmly at the defense table, and she was not alone. Beside her sat a man Bell vaguely recognized from the local news, though he couldn't place the name. He was older, incredibly distinguished, wearing a bespoke charcoal grey suit that clearly cost more than Bell's monthly take-home salary. The man had a serious, weathered face, a meticulously trimmed salt and pepper beard, and piercing, intelligent eyes that immediately locked onto the young officer with the intensity of a predator assessing its prey. The presiding judge, a stern-looking, no-nonsense woman named Honorable Judge Reynolds, entered the courtroom through her private chamber's door. "All rise," the bailiff intoned loudly. Judge Reynolds took her elevated seat, adjusted her microphone, and shuffled the thick stack of paperwork before her. Next on the docket, case number 24-TR-8894, City of Atlanta versus Shanice Wright. Citation for a defective taillight and a warning for failure to comply. How does the defendant plead? The distinguished man beside Shanice stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with a fluid motion. "Not guilty, Your Honor. Furthermore, the defense is filing an immediate motion to dismiss this case with prejudice, based on a total lack of probable cause, illegal detention, and the presentation of falsified evidence by the arresting officer." Bell nearly laughed out loud, though he managed to stifle it into a quiet scoff. Falsified evidence? For a $50 traffic ticket? This woman had completely lost her mind. They were treating this like a murder trial. The prosecutor, a young, slightly disheveled assistant district attorney who looked severely overworked and desperately in need of coffee, glanced nervously at the defense attorney. "Your Honor, the state objects to the motion. We are prepared to proceed with the hearing. Officer Bell is present and ready to testify." "Very well," Judge Reynolds said, looking intrigued despite herself. "Let's hear the testimony. Call your witness, counselor." Bell took the stand, raised his right hand, swore the standard oath to tell the truth, and settled comfortably into the wooden witness chair. He felt entirely at ease. This was his turf. The courtroom was an extension of his patrol car. The young prosecutor stood up to begin the direct examination. "Officer Bell, can you please describe for the court the events of the afternoon of July 12th, regarding your interaction with the defendant, Ms. Wright?" Bell launched into his smooth, rehearsed narrative, a script he had recited 100 times before. He spoke in clipped professional tones about observing the dangerously defective driver's side taillight, initiating a standard investigatory traffic stop for public safety, and the defendant's immediate hostile, argumentative demeanor. He conveniently, expertly omitted his derogatory comments about her car, his assumptions about her neighborhood, and the prolonged, humiliating wait on the curb. He focused solely on the alleged mechanical infraction. "Did you subsequently issue a citation to the defendant?" the prosecutor asked, checking off a box on his legal pad. "Yes, sir, I did. I issued a standard traffic citation for the broken tail light, as required by department policy," Bell confirmed, looking exceedingly self-righteous. "Thank you, officer. The state has no further questions for this witness." Judge Reynolds turned her attention to the defense table. "Cross-examination, counselor?" The distinguished man stood up slowly, picking up a slim leather folio. He approached the podium with a slow, predatory grace that made the air in the courtroom feel suddenly thinner. "Officer Bell," he began, his voice surprisingly deep, resonant, and carrying effortlessly to the back of the room. "You just testified under oath that you clearly observed a broken tail light on my client's vehicle prior to initiating the traffic stop. Is that an accurate summary of your sworn statement? Yes, sir, that's correct, Bell answered confidently, leaning forward slightly. And you are absolutely certain of this visual observation? There is no room for error? Absolutely certain. I saw it with my own 2 eyes. The attorney turned gracefully back to his table and picked up a large manila envelope. Your Honor, I would like to formally introduce Defense Exhibit A into evidence. He handed a glossy 8x10 photograph to the bailiff, who passed it up to the judge for review, then to the prosecutor, and finally walked it over to Bell on the witness stand. The photograph was a flawlessly clear, high-resolution image of the rear of Shanice's silver Lexus. Both red taillights were perfectly intact, illuminated brightly against the asphalt. The undeniable, unalterable digital time and date stamp in the lower right corner clearly showed the image was captured a mere 5 minutes after the traffic stop had concluded. Officer Bell, the attorney continued, his tone dropping to a dangerously soft whisper that forced everyone to lean in to listen. Can you perhaps explain to this court how a taillight that was supposedly broken during your traffic stop miraculously repaired itself 5 minutes later in the CVS parking lot? Bell stared down at the photograph, the color slowly draining from his cheeks. A cold, sharp prickle of unease formed at the base of his neck. His protective swagger began to violently crack. The courtroom, previously buzzing with the low-level ambient noise of municipal bureaucracy, fell into a sudden, hushed silence. Bell swallowed hard, his throat suddenly bone dry. His eyes darted nervously between the damning photograph in his hands and the impassive face of the defense attorney. Well, Bell stammered, shifting uncomfortably on the hard wooden seat, his mind scrambling for a plausible excuse. It's possible it was an intermittent electrical issue. Sometimes the wiring gets loose and they flicker on and off over bumps. An intermittent electrical issue, the attorney repeated slowly, tasting the words, letting the sheer absurdity of the excuse hang in the quiet air. I see. Officer Bell, tell me, are you a certified automotive mechanic? No, sir. Do you hold any degrees or specialized training in complex automotive electrical systems? No. So your spontaneous diagnosis under oath of an intermittent electrical issue is entirely speculative and lacks any factual basis. It was a devastating statement, not a question, and it hung heavy over the witness stand. Before Bell could formulate a defense, the attorney picked up another, thicker document from his table. Your Honor, I present Defense Exhibit B. This is a legally sworn, notarized affidavit from the senior service manager at Hennessy Lexus of Atlanta. It details a comprehensive computerized diagnostic test performed on Ms. Wright's specific vehicle exactly 48 hours prior to this traffic stop. The report conclusively confirms that the entire electrical system, including all exterior safety lighting, was functioning perfectly, with 0 error codes recorded in the vehicle's onboard computer. The young prosecutor looked down at the copy of the document handed to him, his brow furrowing deeply in confusion and rising panic. He hadn't anticipated this incredible level of meticulous preparation for a simple $50 traffic ticket. He realized he was standing on a landmine. Officer Bell, the defense attorney pressed on, stepping out from behind the podium and moving closer to the witness stand, closing the physical distance. If the taillight was in fact not broken as the physical evidence proves, why exactly did you pull my client over? I genuinely believed it was broken at the time I initiated the lights, Bell insisted, his voice rising defensively, tinged with a slight whine. I acted in good faith for public safety. Good faith, the attorney scoffed softly, shaking his head. Let's explore your concept of good faith. You testified earlier that my client was hostile upon contact. Is that accurate? Yes, she was highly argumentative and uncooperative from the moment I approached the window. Uncooperative because she politely but firmly refused a warrantless search of her vehicle? Yes, that's a sign of suspicious behavior. A search you specifically requested based on the alleged scent of raw marijuana? That is correct. I smelled it. The attorney turned his back on Bell and faced the gallery and the judge. Your Honor, we have subpoenaed the official dashcam and bodycam audio and video footage from Officer Bell's patrol vehicle from the day in question. Bell's stomach plummeted into his boots. He knew exactly what was recorded on that unedited footage. He had assumed with breathtaking arrogance that for a minor traffic violation, no defense attorney would ever bother going through the bureaucratic nightmare of pulling the video. The video began playing on the large flat-screen monitors mounted on the courtroom walls. It showed the initial, mundane stop. But then the audio kicked in. It captured Bell's aggressive, strutting posture as he approached the window. It broadcasted his derogatory, sneering comments about her car and his assumptions about her not belonging in the wealthy neighborhood, his voice echoing loudly in the silent courtroom. Most damningly, it clearly captured Shanice's consistently calm, measured, polite responses, contrasting sharply and uncomfortably with Bell's rapidly escalating hostility and physical intimidation tactics. It showed him calling for the K9 unit out of spite, and the dog definitively failing to alert to anything, proving the marijuana claim was an absolute fabrication. When the video finally concluded, the silence in the courtroom was deafening, heavy with judgment. Judge Reynolds' expression was no longer intrigued. It was like carved granite, radiating barely suppressed fury. "Officer Bell," the defense attorney said, his voice ringing out like a bell in the quiet room. "In the video we just watched, you stated, and I quote verbatim, 'doesn't look like the kind of car someone like you would be driving around this neighborhood.' Tell this court, what exactly did you mean by someone like you?" Bell felt cold sweat prickling on his forehead and under his tight collar. I simply meant someone who didn't live in the immediate area. A commuter. But my client clearly informed you within the first 60 seconds of the stop that she lived a mere 3 blocks away. A factual statement you easily could have verified by checking the address on her driver's license against her vehicle registration, both of which you held simultaneously in your hand. Bell had no answer. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked desperately at the prosecutor's table for a lifeline, an objection, anything. But the young DA was staring intently at his legal pad, his face pale, actively avoiding all eye contact with the sinking officer. "You fabricated the broken taillight to initiate an unlawful stop," the attorney stated, his voice gaining unstoppable momentum, hammering the nails into Bell's coffin. "You maliciously fabricated the scent of marijuana to attempt to justify an illegal, unconstitutional search. And you did all of this because you looked into that car and made a deeply biased, racist assumption about a black woman driving a luxury vehicle in Buckhead." "Objection. Badgering the witness," the prosecutor finally mumbled, half-heartedly, out of pure procedural obligation. "Sustained," Judge Reynolds snapped, though her blazing eyes remained fixed on Bell with a chilling, terrifying intensity. "Rephrase your statement, counselor." The attorney smiled, a thin, incredibly cold smile that did not reach his eyes. "I will gladly withdraw the question, Your Honor. I believe the digital and documentary evidence speaks entirely for itself, but I do have one final, crucial question for Officer Bell before I conclude." He turned fully toward Bell, the distinguished, weathered features of his face hardening into a mask of pure authority. "Officer Bell, looking at her now, do you have any idea who my client actually is?" Bell slowly turned his head and looked at Shanice Wright. She sat serenely at the defense table, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture perfect. She didn't look angry. She didn't look vindictive. She looked profoundly, heavily disappointed, like a teacher regarding a student who had failed a crucial moral test. "She's Shanice Wright," Bell said, stating the obvious, confusion lacing his trembling voice. He didn't understand the trap he was in. The defense attorney nodded slowly, savoring the moment. "Yes, she is Shanice Wright. What you clearly failed to realize, Officer Bell, in your careless rush to judgment and your desperation to exert dominance, is her full, proper title." The attorney paused, letting the heavy tension in the room stretch and pull until it was almost physically unbearable. He turned away from the witness stand and faced the bench. "Your Honor, for the official court record, my name is Marcus Thorne. I am the senior managing partner at Thorne, Abernathy and Hayes." A loud collective murmur rippled through the gallery of lawyers and civilians alike. Thorne, Abernathy and Hayes was arguably the most powerful, feared civil rights and constitutional law firm in the entire Southeast. They absolutely did not handle $50 traffic tickets. "And my client," Thorne continued, his voice echoing off the wood paneling as he turned back to point at the woman at the table, "is not just a quiet resident of the Buckhead district. She is the Honorable Shanice Wright, the newly appointed Chief Judge of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia." The courtroom absolutely erupted. Shocked gasps echoed from the gallery. A reporter in the back row scrambled for his phone. The young prosecutor physically dropped his pen, it clattering loudly on the wooden table, his mouth falling open in unmasked horror. Even Judge Reynolds, despite her decades of stoic judicial demeanor, physically jolted, raising an eyebrow in profound surprise. Justin Bell felt all the blood drain rapidly from his face, pooling in his stomach. The room seemed to tilt. The perceived power of the shiny metal badge on his chest suddenly felt infinitesimally small, less than useless. The terrifying reality crashed over him like a tidal wave. He had just racially profiled, illegally detained on the side of the road, and blatantly lied under federal oath about a sitting chief federal judge. He had picked a fight with a woman who commanded the FBI and U.S. Marshals in her courtroom. "Judge Wright," Thorne continued, his voice easily cutting through the rising noise of the shocked room, "specifically chose to handle this deeply disturbing matter personally, appearing today as an ordinary private citizen. She wanted to experience firsthand the kind of unchecked, biased policing occurring on the streets of our city. She didn't flash her judicial credentials to avoid the ticket on the curb. She didn't use her immense political influence to have this quietly dismissed by the DA beforehand. She wanted every single lie, every violation of civil rights, documented publicly on this court's record." Bell was paralyzed, glued to the chair. The unearned arrogance that had fueled him for years evaporated instantly, replaced by a suffocating, icy dread. He looked at Shanice, Judge Wright. She met his terrified gaze, and for the first time, stripped of his ego, he saw the formidable intellect, the iron will, and the unwavering, terrifying authority she possessed. She hadn't needed to shout or posture in that CVS parking lot. She had known precisely, mathematically, how this would end from the moment he opened his mouth. "Officer Bell," Thorne said softly, delivering the final blow, "you swore a sacred oath to uphold the law and protect the Constitution. Instead, you weaponized your authority to harass an innocent woman based entirely on your own pathetic prejudice. You willfully lied on an official police report, and you committed blatant perjury under oath in this very courtroom today. That is a felony." Thorne turned to Judge Reynolds, bowing his head slightly. "Your Honor, the defense rests its case, and given the overwhelming, undeniable evidence of perjury, false imprisonment, and severe civil rights violations we have witnessed today, we formally request that a complete, unedited transcript of these proceedings be forwarded immediately, via courier, to the Fulton County District Attorney's Office and the Internal Affairs Division of the Atlanta Police Department." Judge Reynolds didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. She looked down at Justin Bell with a potent mixture of utter professional disgust and deep personal pity. "The defense's motion to dismiss with prejudice is immediately granted," Judge Reynolds declared, her heavy wooden gavel coming down with a resounding final crack that made Bell flinch. "Officer Bell, you are dismissed from the stand. I strongly, urgently suggest you retain competent criminal legal counsel before the sun sets today. This court is adjourned." Bell stumbled down from the elevated witness stand, his legs feeling like they were made of lead, barely supporting his weight. He didn't look at his fellow officers in the gallery, who were already distancing themselves from him. He didn't look at the furious prosecutor. He kept his eyes glued to the scuffed linoleum floor, the realization of his catastrophic, self-inflicted mistake crushing the air out of his lungs. He had thought he held all the power in the world. He had been completely, devastatingly wrong. The professional and public fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely merciless. The body cam and dash cam footage, once legally released to the public under the Freedom of Information Act, went viral within hours. It blanketed national news networks and social media platforms, becoming a damning, irrefutable indictment of unchecked bias and the abuse of police power. The Atlanta Police Department, desperate to distance themselves from the catastrophic PR disaster and avoid the wrath of the federal courts, suspended Officer Justin Bell without pay before the evening news aired, pending a full expedited investigation. 2 agonizing weeks later, the Fulton County District Attorney, facing immense public pressure, announced formal felony charges against Bell for perjury in a court of law and filing a false official police report. Simultaneously, the Department of Justice announced they were opening a sweeping civil rights inquiry into Bell's past arrests. Bell found himself sitting alone in a sterile, windowless interrogation room at Internal Affairs, the very place he had gleefully sent suspects in the past with a smug sense of absolute superiority. His lawyer, a harried, exhausted public defender, advised him to remain completely silent. But the silence in the room only amplified the echoing absolute ruin of his entire life and career. The thin blue line had instantly dissolved. His former colleagues viewed him not as a brother, but as a dangerous liability who had exposed their department to ruin. He lost his hard-earned badge. He was stripped of his pension. He faced the very real, terrifying prospect of years in state prison. But the hardest, most agonizing blow was the complete public humiliation. The community he was sworn to protect now viewed his face on the news with a mixture of righteous anger and deep contempt. He had, through his own hubris, become the national poster boy for exactly what was wrong with the modern justice system. Across the sprawling city, in her spacious, soundproofed chambers at the federal courthouse, Chief Judge Shanice Wright sat at her massive mahogany desk, quietly reviewing a tall stack of complex case files. The local news segment detailing Bell's grand jury indictment played quietly, muted, on a small television in the corner of her office. She didn't feel a sense of vindictive triumph. There was no joy or satisfaction in watching a young man systematically destroy his own life and potential through sheer ignorance and unchecked arrogance. But she felt a profound, heavy sense of necessity. True justice, she deeply believed, wasn't merely about punishing the guilty. It was about painfully exposing the rot hidden in the dark corners so the system itself could finally begin to heal. Later that afternoon, Marcus Thorne tapped lightly and entered her chambers. "The district attorney's office is aggressively pushing for a plea deal," Thorne informed her, taking a seat in one of the plush leather chairs across from her desk. "They want to avoid a lengthy, highly publicized trial that will drag the department through the mud for months." Shanice nodded slowly, carefully removing her silver wire glasses and setting them on the desk. "I expected as much. What are the proposed terms of the plea?" "He pleads guilty to the lesser charges. He resigns from the police force permanently, officially surrenders his post-certification, so he can never work in law enforcement anywhere in the country again, and serves 5 years of supervised probation. No active jail time, but his life as a cop is over forever." "It's a fair and measured outcome," Shanice said quietly, looking at the scales of justice sitting on her bookshelf. "It permanently protects the public from him wielding that authority again, which was the ultimate goal from the moment I stepped out of my car." "You could have easily pushed the DA for harsher penalties," Thorne noted, watching her carefully. "Given the blatant, documented perjury under oath against a federal official." "Vengeance isn't justice, Marcus," Shanice replied, her voice firm, anchored by decades of jurisprudence. "He lost his chosen career, his public standing, and his reputation. That is the natural, inevitable consequence of his own actions catching up to him. I don't need to see a young man locked in a cage to feel personally vindicated. I just needed him off the streets before his arrogance cost someone their life." She stood up and walked over to the large floor-to-ceiling window of her chambers, looking out over the bustling, complex city of Atlanta below, a city she had sworn to serve. Power, she mused softly, her breath fogging the glass slightly, is an incredibly dangerous tool when placed in the hands of someone who doesn't understand the immense responsibility that comes with it. Officer Bell mistakenly thought his tin badge gave him the magical right to dictate reality. He learned the hard, tragic way that true, lasting authority comes only from integrity, not intimidation. Thorne smiled, a rare, genuine expression of deep professional and personal respect. You handled the situation perfectly, Your Honor. I handled it the only way my conscience would allow, she said, turning away from the window and walking back to the towering stack of files on her desk. By staying calm and simply letting the undeniable truth speak for itself. Justin Bell's story ended not with a dramatic bang, but with a quiet, ignominious and shameful exit from public life. He became a cautionary tale, a whispered, fearful reminder in precinct locker rooms across the state about the catastrophic dangers of hubris and racial prejudice. Shanice Wright, meanwhile, continued her vital work on the federal bench. Her already sterling reputation for fairness, brilliant legal mind, and unwavering dedication to the spirit of the law was only strengthened by the public ordeal. She had faced down a terrifying systemic abuse of power not with fire, fury, or retaliation, but with the calm, immovable, crushing weight of the truth. She had proven to a watching city that while